All right, so let's dive into one of the wildest social experiments in history. Meet Philip Zimbardo, psychology professor, charismatic leader, and the guy who thought, what if we locked a bunch of college students in a basement and gave them absolute power, or absolutely none? What could possibly go wrong? Spoiler alert, everything. It was the summer of 1971 at Stanford University, and Zimbardo had a mission. He wanted to understand how ordinary people could turn into tyrants or victims when put into extreme environments. Inspired by real-life prison abuses, he decided to create a simulation so realistic it could have been a Netflix original. The setting? The basement of Jordan Hall, converted into a makeshift prison complete with steel-barred doors, bare-bones cells, and a solitary confinement closet. If you didn't know better, you'd think Zimbardo had a side hustle as a set designer for dystopian films. To recruit participants, Zimbardo put out a newspaper ad promising $15 a day, a sweet deal for broke college students equivalent to about $110 a day in today's money. After screening 75 applicants, he handpicked 24 of the most normal and psychologically stable young men. Yeah, let's remember that word, stable. Because what's about to unfold is anything but. The group was split randomly. Half would be prisoners, stripped of their identities and assigned numbers, while the other half would be guards, armed with mirrored sunglasses, batons, and unlimited authority, except for physical violence. It was all meant to be a harmless role-play experiment lasting 2 weeks. But as we'll see, nothing about this was harmless. Zimbardo wasn't content to let the prisoners simply walk into their new roles either. Oh no, he wanted realism. So he had the Palo Alto Police Department stage actual arrests. Picture it. College students dragged from their homes in handcuffs in front of bewildered neighbors and shoved into squad cars. By the time they were booked, fingerprinted, and blindfolded, they probably felt like they'd stepped into a Kafka novel. Once inside the prison, things got even weirder. The prisoners were stripped, deloused, don't ask with what, and forced to wear ill-fitting smocks with their assigned numbers printed on them. Their names were gone. They were now just Prisoner 8612, Prisoner 819, and so on. Meanwhile, the guards were handed uniforms and instructions to maintain order however they saw fit. What could go wrong, right? At first, it was awkward. The guards didn't know how to act, and the prisoners weren't sure how seriously to take their new roles. But by day 2, the roles began sinking in, and so did the madness. By day 2, the Stanford Prison Experiment had spiraled into something Zimbardo himself probably didn't anticipate. What had started as an awkward role-playing game quickly morphed into a psychological battlefield. The guards, emboldened by their authority and anonymity, began pushing boundaries. It started small, forcing prisoners to do menial tasks like cleaning their cells or standing silently for long periods. But it didn't stay small for long. The first signs of trouble came from Prisoner 8612. He wasn't having it. After being shouted at and humiliated by the guards, he started shouting back, refusing to follow orders. The guards responded by throwing him into solitary confinement, which was literally a dark closet with barely enough space to stand. It wasn't just a punishment, it was a power play, a way to make sure the prisoners knew exactly who was in charge. But here's the thing, 8612 didn't break. If anything, he doubled down, yelling that the whole setup was unfair and demanding to be released. The guards? They weren't about to let some prisoner ruin their newfound sense of control. They turned up the heat, subjecting him to hours of psychological pressure. Eventually, 8612 cracked, displaying signs of severe emotional distress. He started screaming, sobbing, and even threatening violence. Zimbardo, stepping into his role as superintendent, allowed him to leave the experiment, but not before making him feel like he was failing at his assigned role. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was a power trip, and the guards were fully embracing their darker sides. They created elaborate punishments for even the smallest infractions. Prisoners who didn't follow orders were forced to do push-ups, often with another prisoner sitting on their back. They were made to clean toilets with their bare hands and sleep on cold concrete floors without blankets. Some guards started waking prisoners up in the middle of the night for random roll calls, shouting their numbers and demanding they repeat them. And then there were the psychological tactics. One guard, later nicknamed John Wayne for his sadistic behavior, took it upon himself to play the villain. He mocked prisoners, insulted them, and devised degrading tasks like forcing them to bark like dogs or pretend to be inanimate objects. The guards began to see the prisoners as less than human, just numbers in smocks. Meanwhile, Zimbardo was watching all of this unfold and doing absolutely nothing. He was so caught up in his role as superintendent that he ignored the red flags. He even encouraged the guards to maintain order, however they saw fit, fueling their descent into cruelty. The prisoners, isolated and demoralized, started turning on each other. Those who complied with the guards' demands were labeled as snitches, creating rifts within the group. The unity they'd shared at the beginning was gone, replaced by suspicion and fear. Prisoner 819, who had initially tried to keep his head down, broke down after being singled out for a particularly humiliating punishment. The guards forced him to stand in front of the other prisoners while they chanted, "819 did a bad thing," over and over. By the end of day 4, it was clear that this experiment had gone far beyond its original intent. The guards were fully immersed in their roles, the prisoners were falling apart, and Zimbardo was too blinded by the realism of the situation to step in. The line between role play and reality had blurred, and everyone involved was spiraling into chaos. By day 5, the Stanford Prison Experiment had crossed a line no one could ignore. Well, almost no one. While Zimbardo sat in his office, still treating this nightmare as groundbreaking science, the situation inside the prison was descending into full-blown psychological warfare. The guards, drunk on their unchecked power, began inventing punishments that were less about maintaining order and more about sheer cruelty. One particularly disturbing tactic was the use of food deprivation. Guards would withhold meals from prisoners they deemed uncooperative, forcing them to beg or barter for basic sustenance. When food was finally offered, it came with strings attached, like forcing prisoners to perform degrading tasks in front of the others or endure verbal abuse. The guards weren't just enforcing rules anymore. They were toying with the prisoners for their own amusement. And then there was solitary confinement. That cramped little closet became the ultimate tool for breaking spirits. Prisoners sent there weren't given a specific sentence. They were just left to stew in the darkness, unsure when, or if, they'd be let out. Some prisoners emerged visibly shaken, their confidence shattered. Meanwhile, Zimbardo continued to justify the escalating abuse. He argued that the extreme conditions were part of the experiment, that the guards were simply playing their roles. But the truth was, Zimbardo himself had become part of the problem. His refusal to intervene gave the guards implicit permission to push boundaries further and further, turning a psychological study into a full-blown dystopian nightmare. The breaking point came when Christina Maslach, a graduate student and Zimbardo's girlfriend at the time, visited the mock prison to observe the study. What she witnessed horrified her. Prisoners were dirty, disheveled, and emotionally wrecked. Guards barked orders and laughed at their misery, treating the entire situation like a game. Christina confronted Zimbardo, demanding to know how he could let this happen. Her words hit a nerve, and for the first time, Zimbardo stepped back and saw the chaos for what it was. The experiment, which was supposed to last 2 weeks, was shut down on day 6. The prisoners were released, the guards were sent home, and the prison was dismantled. But the psychological scars remained. Some prisoners reported nightmares and emotional distress for weeks afterward, while several guards admitted they were shocked by their own behavior. In the aftermath, Zimbardo defended the experiment as a necessary exploration of human behavior. He argued that it revealed how easily people could adopt roles of power and submission when placed in a hierarchical structure. Critics, however, saw it differently. They accused Zimbardo of ethical negligence, pointing out that he had allowed the abuse to spiral out of control for the sake of his research. Over the years, the Stanford Prison Experiment has become one of psychology's most infamous case studies. It's been dissected, debated, and dramatized countless times, with some even questioning the validity of its findings. But one thing is undeniable: it exposed a dark side of human nature that's hard to ignore. The experiment wasn't just about what happens in a prison. It was about what happens when people are given unchecked power, stripped of accountability, and told to follow orders. It's a chilling reminder that the line between order and chaos is thinner than we'd like to believe. Thanks for tuning into Talescape. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that prove sometimes the scariest experiments aren't in the lab, they're in our own minds.